in the history of humankind. There are eras that left such a vivid mark that their echoes can still be heard today. One of these eras was the so-called Age of the Vikings. Travelers from the cold shores of Scandinavia set out to sea on their longships, and their name was known from England to the distant coast of Asia. They were warriors, but also merchants, raiders, but also settlers, destroyers, yet also builders of new connections between far-off lands. Imagine the misty coast of the North Sea. On the horizon appears the dark silhouette of a longship for a monk in an English abbey. It means fear and destruction for a merchant in distant Rus. It promises new opportunities for trade. For the Vikings themselves, it was a path to glory, wealth, or death. Their story is not only sagas and legends, but real events that reshaped the face of medieval Europe. And to understand their legacy, we must step back into the time when Scandinavian seafarers turned their icy fjords into gateways to the wider world. If you enjoy exploring stories like these from the past, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Many more journeys through time lie ahead. In modern imagination, Vikings often appear as fierce warriors with axes and helmets. But behind this image was the everyday life of ordinary people, shaped by the harsh northern climate and the constant need to survive in difficult conditions. Most Vikings were not warriors at all, but farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. Their settlements were scattered in narrow valleys and along the fjords. At the heart of each community stood the longhouse, a large wooden building with an earthen floor, with a whole family and sometimes livestock lived under one roof. Inside, a central fire burned constantly, giving warmth and light, while the smoke slowly drifted out through a hole in the roof. Around this fire stories were told. Songs were sung, and old legends were passed down from one generation to the next. Viking food was simple but nourishing. In coastal areas, fish formed the foundation of their diet: cod, herring, and salmon. On their fields they grew barley and rye, which were used to bake coarse bread. At feasts, meat was served: pork, beef, or lamb. Their favorite drink was mead, brewed from honey, water, and herbs. For the Vikings, food was more than just sustenance. Great feasts carried social and even religious significance. Viking society had a clear structure. At the top were the jarls, local chieftains and nobles who owned land, led expeditions, and commanded warriors. Beneath them were the carls, free farmers and craftsmen who formed the backbone of the community. At the bottom were the thralls, slaves often taken in raids from other lands. Slavery was part of the Viking economy, though thralls could sometimes earn their freedom and become integrated into the community. Despite the harshness of life, Viking society had elements of democracy. Important decisions were made at the Thing, an assembly of free men. There, disputes were settled, laws were declared, and the fate of expeditions was decided. The Thing symbolized that even in an age of raids and warfare, there was respect for the voice of the community. Another notable detail was their attention to hygiene. Archaeologists have found combs, tweezers, and even small ear-cleaning tools made of bone or metal. Anglo-Saxon chronicles mention that Scandinavians bathed more often than other Europeans, at least once a week. This gave them a reputation for cleanliness and a striking impression on their neighbors. Women in Viking society also played an important role. They could own land, manage property, and even initiate divorce. While men went on expeditions, women ran the households and maintained order in the community. Their role was far broader than that of women in many other medieval cultures. Such was the daily life of the people we now call Vikings, a life of labor, strict customs, and communities bound together by their longhouses, their fields, and the sea. And it was from this ordinary way of life that the strength was born which allowed Scandinavians to sail beyond their homeland and reshape the world. If there is one symbol that best embodies the Vikings, it is their ships. It was the ships that allowed Scandinavians to leave their native fjords and sail far beyond the north. Without them, The Vikings would have remained only local warriors and farmers. But thanks to their vessels, they became travelers, merchants, and conquerors. The most famous type was a drakkar, a long, narrow ship with high sides and a symmetrical bow and stern. This design allowed it to move forward or backward without turning, an advantage that was invaluable in narrow rivers or during battle. A drakkar could carry dozens of warriors, yet was light enough to be hauled over land from one river to another. Alongside the warships were the merchant vessels, known as nars. These were broader, with larger holds for cargo. It was on nars that the Vikings transported furs, honey, silver, and other goods to the markets of Europe and Asia. Their shipbuilding technology still amazes us today. Planks were overlapped in a clinker-built style, creating a hull that was strong yet flexible. The ship seemed to breathe with the waves, able to withstand even fierce storms. A large woolen square sail carried it across great distances, while oars allowed for maneuvering during landings or in narrow waters. Equally remarkable was the way the Vikings navigated. They had no compasses, but relied on their knowledge of nature. The sun and the stars guided them. There are accounts of the use of a so-called sunstone, a crystal that can help determine the sun's position even on cloudy days. Skilled sailors read the direction of the wind, the color of the water, and the behavior of birds. All of this gave them the confidence to set out on long journeys into the unknown. With their ships, the Vikings reached the coasts of England and Ireland, France, and Spain. They sailed along the rivers of Rus all the way to the Black Sea. They traded in Constantinople and even fought beneath its walls. They reached Iceland and Greenland, and Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, in the early 11th century stepped onto the soil of North America centuries before Columbus. Picture the scene. Dawn over a fjord, the mist lifting as a long silhouette of the ship emerges, its carved dragon head rising from the prow. The sail fills with wind, oars dip into the water in steady rhythm, and the vessel, like a living creature, glides into the open sea. Such was the beginning of many journeys that reshaped history. Ships were not only a means of travel, they carried symbolic meaning as well. In the burials of chieftains, entire stone outlines of ships were built, or bodies were placed in real vessels that became their final resting place. The ship represented the voyage to another world, showing just how deeply the sea was woven into Viking life and belief. It was thanks to the sea that they became the people we remember today. Every raid, every trading expedition, and even every saga began with a ship setting sail into the open waters. When people hear the word Viking, the first image that often comes to mind is of raids on the coast of Europe, and with good reason. This was the beginning of their fame, and the fear they spread across medieval kingdoms. The first recorded raid that entered history took place in 793. The monastery of Lindisfarne on the coast of northern England awoke to terror. Black ships emerged from the mist, and armed men poured onto the shore. To the monks, who had never seen such warriors, it felt like the end of the world. The attack was brutal. The monastery was pillaged, holy relics stolen, and news of the horror spread quickly across Europe. From that moment, the name of the Vikings became a synonym for destruction and fear. But that was only the beginning. In the following decades, waves of Scandinavian ships swept across the shores of Britain, Ireland, France, and Spain. They chose monasteries and villages as their targets, places rich in treasure but poor in defenses. Their raids were swift. The ships appeared suddenly on the horizon. Warriors stormed ashore, looted, and just as quickly returned to the sea before local forces could respond. Yet the Vikings did not stop at plundering. Over time, they began to settle on the lands they had taken. In Ireland, they founded cities that still exist today: Dublin, Wexford, Waterford. In England, they seized a vast territory that became known as the Danelaw, the land of the Danes. Their own laws held sway, and Viking families made their homes. France also felt the power of the Northmen. In 845, Vikings, led by the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, sailed up the Seine and laid waste along their path, reaching Paris itself. The city was saved only by paying a massive ransom. That attack forced the Frankish rulers to recognize that new strategies were needed to resist them. In the end, in 911, the Duchy of Normandy was officially granted to the Viking leader Rollo and his followers. On French soil, a new state arose, one that would later give the world the Norman conquerors. Their reach stretched even farther east. The rivers of Eastern Europe became highways for the Varangians, as they were known there. They sailed down the Dnieper and the Volga, trading and fighting with local tribes, reaching as far as the Black and Caspian Seas. Their greatest partner and rival was the Byzantine Empire. Chronicles from Constantinople describe how these northern barbarians came to the very walls of the city, threatening the heart of the empire. Yet at the same time, Byzantine emperors recruited them into their own elite guard, the famous Varangian Guard. Equally important was the way Vikings learned to combine war with trade. In many places they were first met as raiders, but later welcomed as merchants. They sold furs, amber, and slaves, and in return bought silver, silk, and wine. In this way, they integrated into local economies and became an inseparable part of medieval Europe. Their journeys sometimes reached astonishing distances. Around the year 1000, Vikings from Greenland, led by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, reached the coast of North America. This achievement, recorded in Norse sagas and confirmed by archaeology at the site of L'Anse aux Meadows in Canada, proves that the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot on the American continent, 5 centuries before Columbus. From the monastery of Lindisfarne to the founding of Normandy, from the rivers of Rus to the shores of America, Viking raids and conquests transformed them from small Scandinavian tribes into one of the most influential forces of the medieval world. And behind every expedition stood a ship that ventured into the sea, and bold men who were willing to risk everything for treasure, glory, and new lands. Although the Vikings are most often remembered for their raids, their role as traders was just as important. Trade was the force that connected them with the wider world, and it was through commerce that the Scandinavians influenced the development of both Europe and Asia. The Vikings were never isolated. Their ships carried not only warriors, but also goods. If raids brought quick plunder, trade offered a path to lasting wealth. By the 8th and 9th centuries, Scandinavian merchants were actively using Europe's great river systems. Their ships sailed up the Seine in France, the Thames in England, and the Rhine in Germany. To the east, they navigated the Dnieper and the Volga, opening the route known as from the Varangians to the Greeks. This route became one of the key arteries of medieval Europe. It began in the Baltic Sea, passed through Novgorod and Kiev, and led down to the Black Sea and ultimately to Constantinople, the heart of Byzantium. Varangian traders brought furs from the north, amber from the Baltic, iron, slaves, and honey. In return, they received gold, silver, silk, spices, glass ornaments, and wine. Silver had a special importance. There were no native sources of silver in Scandinavia, so the Arab and Byzantine coins the Vikings brought back from the east became their de facto currency. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of dirhams from the Abbasid Caliphate in modern-day Sweden and Denmark, clear evidence of just how far their trade networks reached. Trading settlements grew up along Viking routes. Hedeby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, and York in England became major centers of exchange and cultural contact. In such towns, one could meet English, Frankish, Arab, and Slavic merchants all in one place. Through these exchanges, the Vikings absorbed many new ideas. They adopted weapon designs, armor, jewelry, and clothing styles, while also bringing their own traditions into foreign lands. In places like England and Ireland, traces of Old Norse remain not only in place names, but even in everyday English words. Rus played a particularly important role. The Varangians did more than trade. They integrated into the local population. They founded the dynasty of the Rurikids, which would go on to rule Chiv and Rus. This is yet another example of how the Vikings, who began as raiders, became part of the political foundations of new states. In Byzantium, the Scandinavians were well known. They were feared enemies and valued allies. The emperors admired their military skills so much that they recruited them into their personal guard, the famed Varangian Guard. These warriors served the emperor with fierce loyalty, earning respect even among the Byzantines. It is proof that the Vikings could be not only destroyers, but also elite protectors of a foreign throne. Trade also transformed Scandinavia itself. Through it, new crafts appeared, along with silver and gold jewelry and fine imported tableware. In burial sites, archaeologists have found artifacts from the Middle East, India, and even China, evidence that the Vikings were part of global networks that stretched for thousands of miles. Their cultural legacy proved lasting. In England and Ireland, they left marks on city planning and architecture. In France, their presence gave rise to Normandy, which later conquered England. In the East, they shaped the rise of the Chivan state and expanded its trade ties. The Vikings entered history as conquerors, but it is just as fair to call them mediators. They linked North and South, West and East, Christians and Muslims, Europe and Asia, and their influence was so strong that traces of it can still be seen in our world today. The Scandinavian worldview was closely tied to nature. Imagine long winters, dark nights, cold seas, and rugged mountains. Out of this environment were born gods and legends that reflected strength, danger, and the unpredictability of life. For the Vikings, mythology was not only a belief system, but also a way of explaining the world around them. The most famous of their gods was Odin, the god of war, wisdom, and poetry. He was imagined as a wanderer with one eye, having sacrificed the other in exchange for knowledge. He presided over Valhalla, the hall of warriors, where the bravest gathered after death. Odin embodied both the pursuit of wisdom and the desire for glory. Beside him stood Thor, the god of thunder, protector of humankind against the forces of chaos. His weapon was a hammer Mjolnir, which always returned to his hand. Thor was closer to the common people. He was honored as their defender against giants and the destructive powers of nature. Equally important was Loki, the cunning and unpredictable god. He was seen as a trickster, capable of bringing both help and harm. In the myths, Loki often caused disasters, yet at times it was his cunning that saved the gods. The goddess Freya embodied love, fertility, and also war. Half of the slain warriors were believed to go not to Valhalla, but to her hall. Thus, even in death, a warrior might find himself either in Odin's hall or in Freya's, both considered places of honor. The Norse saw the world as Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Its roots reached the underworld. Its trunk stretched to the realm of humans, and its branches touched the heavens where the gods dwelled. Around this tree lay 9 worlds: Asgard, the realm of the gods; Midgard, the world of humans; Jotunheim, the land of giants, and others. This vision reflected their belief in the balance between chaos and order. People lived in Midgard, surrounded by dangers, yet protected by the gods. A special place in their beliefs was the idea of the end of the world, Ragnarok. This was not just a catastrophe, but an unavoidable destiny. In the final battle, gods and giants alike would perish. The sun and moon would vanish, and the sea would swallow the earth. Yet out of this destruction, a new world would be born, pure and free of the old powers. This concept gave a sense of cycles, that even death and ruin were not final, but opened the way for a new beginning. Norse religion had no temples in the modern sense. Sacred places were often found in nature, groves, springs, or hills. Archaeologists have uncovered stone circles and wooden altars where offerings were made to the gods. Sacrifices could be animals and, on rare occasions, humans, acts reserved for exceptional moments. Feasts also carried religious meaning. Drinking mead and eating meat during celebrations was a way of honoring the gods and the ancestors. Such gatherings became rituals that bound the community together. Attitudes toward death were unique among the Vikings. A warrior who fell in battle was seen as a hero worthy of Valhalla. Courage on the battlefield carried not only practical value, but religious significance as well. Burials reflected a person's status. Nobles might be laid to rest in real ships, which became their final homes. The body was accompanied by weapons, jewelry, vessels, and sometimes slaves or animals. The ship symbolized a journey to the afterlife. At times, ships were set ablaze on the water, with fire and smoke believed to carry the soul to the gods. For common folk, burials were more modest, but always included grave goods, tools, weapons, or food, showing a belief that life continued in another realm where such items would still be needed. All of this was passed down through oral tradition. Sagas and songs composed by skalds, the poets who preserved the memory of gods, heroes, and past events. Sagas were not merely entertainment. They taught lessons of courage, loyalty, and cunning. Many of these stories were written down in Icelandic manuscripts in the 13th century, when Scandinavians had already converted to Christianity. Thanks to these texts, we know today about Odin, Thor, and Ragnarok. The faith and mythology of the Vikings was a world with a harshness of nature. The longing for glory and the sense of inescapable fate were all intertwined. They believed that life was short, but that honor and memory could last forever. And it was this belief that made them fearless travelers, willing to sail across seas, charge into battle, or give their lives with the certainty that beyond the horizon another world awaited them. The image of the Vikings in modern culture often does not match reality. For example, they never wore horned helmets. That idea is a later myth, which only appeared in the 19th century thanks to theatrical costumes and opera. Real helmets were simple, made of metal, sometimes with a nose guard for protection. Unlike the stereotype of dirty barbarians, the Vikings were actually quite clean. Archaeologists have found countless combs, tweezers, razors, and even small ear-cleaning tools made from bone or metal. English chronicles even mention that local women admired the neat appearance and cleanliness of the Scandinavians. Women among the Vikings also played an important role. Archaeological discoveries suggest that at times they even took part in military campaigns. The most famous example is a grave in Birka, Sweden, where alongside a woman's skeleton a full warrior's kit was found: sword, arrows, and armor. This led scholars to believe that some women may have fought as warriors, although the debate among historians continues to this day. Genetic studies have shown that the Vikings were not an isolated people. They mixed actively with the local populations in the regions where they settled. In burials in England and Ireland, archaeologists have found bones that carry both Scandinavian and local genetic traits, proof that they quickly integrated into new communities. The Old Norse language, which the Vikings spoke, has left many words in modern English. Everyday terms like sky, egg, window, and even the pronoun, they all come from Norse roots. This shows just how strongly the Vikings influenced the language and daily life of the peoples they lived among. Finally, it is important to remember their role as explorers. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, set foot on the soil of North America. This happened 5 centuries before the voyage of Columbus. Archaeological finds at Lonsay Meadows in Canada confirm that Scandinavian settlements truly existed on the American continent. In this way, the Vikings were not only warriors and merchants, but also explorers, the first Europeans to discover the New World. In the world of the Vikings, women held a unique position for their time. They not only managed households, but also took an active part in trade. Records show that women could independently conduct business at markets, selling textiles, jewelry, and food. Scandinavian law even stated that widows or unmarried women had the right to control their own property without the guardianship of a man or relative. This gave them far more independence compared to women in most other parts of medieval Europe. Women also played an important role in rituals, acting as intermediaries between the human world and the divine. Sources mention priestesses and seeresses known as vulvas. They were regarded as keepers of ancient knowledge, conducting ceremonies and foretelling the future. Even warriors and chieftains respected them, for the word of a vulva could influence decisions about war or alliances. The appearance of the Vikings also had details often overlooked. For instance, both men and women used dyes for their hair. Archaeologists have found traces of substances made from wood ash that lighten hair color. This explains why the sagas so often describe fair-haired heroes. Blonde hair was seen as a mark of beauty and status. Their clothing was also much more colorful than people usually imagine. They valued dyes that were difficult to obtain: purple, blue, green, and yellow. The wealthier a person was, the more vibrant and expensive the colors they could afford. Jewelry played a key role in self-expression. Glass or amber necklaces, silver bracelets, and ornate brooches. Women wore oval brooches on their chests, from which chains with amulets or keys often hung. The keys symbolized authority over the household, further emphasizing the woman's role as the keeper of the home. They also paid close attention to the body. Evidence shows that the Vikings regularly visited bathhouses, which were common in Scandinavia. Medieval sources even remarked that the northern people bathed once a week, while in the rest of Europe this was a rarity. This habit made them not only cleaner, but also distinctive in the eyes of their neighbors. The image of the Viking woman combined both practicality and symbolism. She was a guardian of the household, but could also act as a merchant or even a spiritual leader. Her appearance was adorned with bright clothing and jewelry, while the keys on her chest reminded everyone that she held the order of the home in her hands. Altogether, this paints a picture of society where women held a far more visible and respected role than we often assume when speaking of the Middle Ages. The daily life of the Vikings was simple, yet filled with traditions and rituals that gave meaning to everyday existence. At the heart of it all stood the home, a long wooden hall where the entire family lived under one roof. Inside, there was always the smell of smoke, wood, and food. In the center burned the hearth, around which people gathered in the evenings. Children listened to the stories of their elders. Men sharpened weapons or repaired tools, and women spun thread and embroidered. Life was harsh, but not without its comforts. In the long hall, songs were sung and music was played on simple instruments: lyres, flutes, and drums. Festivals held a special place. One of the most important was Yule, the winter celebration that later became the basis for many European Christmas traditions. It was observed during the longest nights of the year. Fires were lit in homes, offerings were made to gods and ancestors, and at the center stood the Yule log, which was meant to burn continuously for several days. Its flames were believed to bring luck and protection for the coming year. During Yule, great feasts were held that could last for days. People drank mead, ate meat, sang songs, and composed verses. Summer festivals were no less important, especially those marking the harvest. At these celebrations, the gods of fertility were honored, offerings were made to Freya and Freyr, fields were decorated with flowers, people danced in circles, and loaves baked from the new grain appeared on the tables. These gatherings were not only religious rituals, but also opportunities for the community to come together, share news, and strengthen social bonds. Feasts among the Vikings meant far more than just food. They were true social events. The wealthier the host, the more lavish the table. Guests were served meat, fish, bread, vegetables, and, of course, drinks. Mead, made from honey, was the most prized. It was served in great horns or wooden cups passed from hand to hand. To drink together was not just to celebrate. It was to seal friendships and alliances. At such feasts, skalds, the poets, played a vital role. They entertained the gathering with tales of gods and heroes, sang songs of praise for the host or warriors returning from expeditions, and sometimes mocked or shamed those who had fallen short. A skald's words could elevate someone to eternal fame or cut them down with ridicule. Poetry, therefore, was not only an art, but also a weapon. Everyday life also included games. Children amused themselves with bones or small wooden figures, while adults enjoyed competitions. Wrestling, spear throwing, and stone lifting were popular contests. In the evenings, people gathered around tables to play board games like Nefadafel, a predecessor of chess. These games were both entertainment and a way to sharpen strategy and tactical thinking, skills valued by any warrior. Religion and daily life were tightly interwoven. Even an ordinary meal began with the host raising a cup to thank the gods. On festival days, animals could be sacrificed, and their meat was shared among the entire community. This symbolized unity. The gods received their portion through sacrifice, and the people shared the rest in fellowship. Despite their rough lives, the Vikings had an appreciation for beauty. Women embroidered their clothing, while men wore buckles decorated with intricate patterns. Even in everyday objects, wooden spoons or clay jugs, ornamental designs can still be found. This shows that even though their lives were steeped in war and labor, they valued aesthetics and sought to leave traces of beauty in their world. Thus, the daily life and festivals of the Vikings were about more than survival in a harsh climate. They were ways of feeling part of a community, honoring the gods, sharing joy, and strengthening bonds of friendship. In these simple yet profound customs, a culture was forged that helped the Scandinavians endure hardship and leave behind a legacy that still impresses us today. For the Vikings, laws were no less important than the sword or the ship. Although they did not have written codes like those of the Roman Empire, their society was built on customs and traditions handed down from their ancestors. The highest expression of these laws was the assembly known as the Thing. The Thing was the heart of justice. It was a gathering of free men where disputes were discussed, alliances made, and decisions about war and peace taken. All who had the right to vote could attend. Free farmers, craftsmen, and warriors. Slaves and women generally had no vote, but they could be witnesses or participants in cases through their relatives. Presiding over the assembly was the law speaker, or skummer. He was the man who knew the laws by heart and could recite them before the entire community. He had no absolute power, but his word carried great weight, for he was the living memory of tradition. Punishments among the Vikings varied depending on the crime. For minor offenses, such as theft, fines or compensation were imposed. For more serious crimes, murder, treason, or insults to honor, the penalties were harsher. Murder was often punished with a payment from the killer's family to the victim's family. This was called word gild, the price of a life. If a conflict could not be resolved with money, the guilty party could be declared an outlaw. To be declared outside the law was a most terrifying sentence. A person cast out of the community lost all legal protection and could be killed by anyone without consequence. It was, in effect, a slow social death. Such judgments made the law as fearsome as a sword. Honor and reputation were the highest values. Even an insult could become grounds for a trial. If someone was publicly shamed or accused of cowardice, it was considered a serious offense against their honor. Justification might require a duel, the holmgang. This was a fight with swords or axes to decide who was right. Over time, holmgangs were restricted in many regions, as they too often ended in deadly conflict. It is also important to note that the Thing was not only a court. It was a communal event where marriages were arranged, trade agreements made, and plans for military expeditions discussed. The Thing symbolized equality among free men. Every voice had the right to be heard. As the Vikings began to form kingdoms in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland, the Things became the foundation for some of the first parliamentary traditions in Europe. In Iceland, for example, the Althing was established in 930, a national assembly that still exists today, making it one of the oldest parliaments in the world. Thus, the world of the Vikings was not a chaotic realm of the sword. It was a society governed by clear rules, where the law was respected, and where even the strongest warrior had to submit to the judgment of the community. Justice was their way of keeping balance between honor, strength, and the common good. Childhood among the Vikings was short. In a world ruled by cold, hard labor and constant danger, children grew up quickly, yet it was within the family and community that they gained the knowledge and skills that made them part of society. From an early age, children were drawn into work. Boys helped their fathers tend livestock, catch fish, and work the fields. Girls, alongside their mothers, learned to prepare food, spin, weave, and care for younger siblings. And though responsibilities were many, childhood was not without play. Archaeologists have found toys made of wood, bone, and clay, small boats, animals, and figurines of warriors. These simple objects entertain the children but also prepare them for adult life. Boys played with wooden swords, while girls played with toy dishes. Games and competitions also held an important place. Children raced, wrestled, and tested their agility. These activities built the strength and endurance needed in a world where everyone had to be ready to defend themselves and their community. Learning did not take place in schools, but through the example of elders. Fathers or grandfathers told sons about hunting and battles, while mothers taught daughters the skills of household management and traditions. Sagas and songs played a central role. In the evenings around the hearth, children listened to tales of gods and heroes. In this way, they absorbed the values of their society: courage, loyalty, and respect for their ancestors. Memory was a Viking's greatest school, and from childhood, children trained themselves to remember poems, proverbs, and laws. Education also had a unique character. Although writing was not common among ordinary people, many children knew runes, the ancient symbols carved into stones and objects. This was less a tool of everyday writing and more a form of magic and art. Knowledge of runes gave a person prestige, and not everyone had the chance to learn them. Children were considered part of the community from an early age. When a boy reached adolescence, he might be taken on sea voyages or small raids. This marked his passage into the adult world. For girls, maturity meant more household responsibilities and later preparation for marriage. Still, there were harsh realities. Child mortality was high, and families often had many children, knowing that not all would survive. But those who did quickly became hardened and ready for a life that demanded both physical and spiritual strength. Thus, childhood among the Vikings was not only a time of play, but also a vital stage of upbringing. From an early age, children learned to work, listen to sagas, remember traditions, and prepare for adult life. Through them, culture and memory were passed on, binding Viking communities together and keeping them strong. The art and crafts of the Vikings were deeply connected to their daily lives and beliefs. Though they are remembered as warriors and seafarers, archaeological finds reveal that the Vikings had a profound passion for beauty and symbolism. Even in the most ordinary objects, whether weapons, jewelry, or household utensils, they expressed artistry. One of the most recognizable features of Viking culture is their ornamental style. On wooden carvings, metal buckles, and stone slabs, we see intricate patterns of interlacing lines, knots, and animal figures. This was the so-called animal style, which evolved over several centuries. Wolves, serpents, dragons, and birds symbolized strength, protection, or connections to the other world. Such images were not mere decorations. They held magical meaning. For in the Viking worldview, there was no clear line between beauty and the sacred. Jewelry making held a special place. Archaeologists have uncovered countless amulets in the form of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. These pendants were worn by both men and women, serving as symbols of protection and signs of loyalty to the old faith, even as Scandinavia gradually converted to Christianity. Alongside these amulets, Vikings produced silver and gold bracelets, amber and glass bead necklaces, and buckles adorned with elaborate designs. Every piece of jewelry was not only a marker of status, but also a way to show belonging to a community or kin group, with carving was widespread, since it was the primary material in Scandinavia. The Vikings decorated ships, houses, and furniture with it. Dragon or serpent heads were often carved into the prows of ships to ward off evil spirits and enemies. The doors of houses were sometimes covered with patterns meant to protect the home from misfortune. Even wooden spoons and combs could carry delicate ornamentation. Beauty was everywhere. Blacksmithing was another vital craft. Vikings were renowned for their skill with metal. Their swords and axes combined strength with elegance. Blades were often decorated with patterns created by welding different types of steel together, giving them a distinctive wavy appearance. This not only strengthened the weapon, but also turned it into a work of art. Every warrior took pride in his weapon, which could be passed down as a family heirloom. Equally important was weaving and textile making. Women devoted much of their time to spinning and weaving, producing clothing for the household. But it was more than a practical task. Fabrics were dyed in bright colors and embellished with patterns. Wealthier families could afford imported textiles from Byzantium or the East. Clothing became both a marker of social rank and a showcase of a woman's skill. A unique feature of Viking art was its presence in burial practices. Rune stones erected on graves often bore not only inscriptions, but also ornaments and scenes from life. These famous rune stones told of the deceased deeds, journeys, or battles. They serve as a kind of stone book of memory, blending art, history, and religion. What is striking about Viking art is its fusion of practicality and meaning. Objects served everyday use, but also embodied beauty and ritual. A sword was both a tool of war and a symbol of honor. Jewelry not only adorned the body, but also acted as an amulet. Ornaments carved on ships and homes were both artistic expression and spiritual protection. Thus, the world of the Vikings was far from savage simplicity. It was a society that valued beauty and symbols, infused meaning into every object, and created art that combined the practical with the spiritual. And it is precisely because of this that today, when we uncover fragments of jewelry or carved stones, we can still sense their world, a world where even amid life's harshness, there was always room for creativity and beauty. Family was the foundation of Viking society. Within the family, a person gained protection, status, and property. It defined not only daily life, but also politics. Through marriages, alliances were forged between clans, communities were strengthened, and conflicts resolved. Marriage was not seen as a matter of personal choice, but as an agreement between two families. Parents and elder relatives had the decisive word. The marriage arrangements usually included discussion of the dowry, the property the bride brought into her new household, and the bride price, a gift from the groom. This created balance between the families, so that both sides were satisfied with the union. Wedding rituals combined practicality with symbolism. The most important was the handing over of keys. When a woman became a wife, she was given the keys to the chests and storerooms. This signified that she was now the mistress of the household and responsible for its property. Another symbolic act was the sword ceremony. The groom gave his bride a sword that had belonged to his ancestors, marking her bond with his lineage. The wedding celebration lasted several days. Relatives and friends from both families gathered at one table, drank mead, and exchanged gifts. A special tradition was of the honeymoon, a full month during which the couple drank honey wine. It was believed to encourage fertility. The modern word honeymoon originates from this custom. In family life, women held significant rights. They could own land and property, manage the household in their husband's absence, and if a husband was cruel or failed in his duties, a woman had the right to divorce. This gave them far more freedom than women in most other medieval European societies. Children were considered the family's greatest wealth. They ensured the continuation of the lineage, provided labor for the household, and future warriors. Birth was marked by rituals. A child was given a name, often connected with ancestors, to pass on their strength and memory. At the same time, there were harsh realities. In Scandinavia, the practice of child exposure existed. If a family was too poor or a baby was born weak, it might be left in nature. It was a painful choice, but in a world of survival, it was seen as necessary. Nevertheless, most children grew up in an atmosphere of care and belonging to a large extended family. Family ties strengthened the community, while marriages created new bonds that reached far beyond a single settlement. Thus, family among the Vikings was not merely a private matter, but the foundation of political and social life. Through marriage, the fates of clans were determined, property was transferred, and a web of alliances was formed that made Scandinavian society strong and resilient. The adoption of Christianity was one of the greatest turning points in Viking life. For centuries, they lived in a world of pagan gods, Odin, Thor, and Freya. But contact with Christian Europe brought a new faith that gradually transformed the face of Scandinavia. The first encounters were far from peaceful. When Vikings raided England or France, they often targeted monasteries. These places were wealthy and poorly defended, but they also housed Christian symbols and sacred treasures. To Europeans, such raids looked like attacks on the faith itself. To the Scandinavians, they were simply opportunities for plunder. Yet it was in these moments that the Vikings first came face to face with the new religion. Over time, these encounters began to change. Victories and raids gave way to trade and diplomacy. Christian missionaries traveled north, seeking to convert chieftains. One of the earliest known cases was King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark. In the 10th century, he accepted Christianity and even ordered the famous gelling stone to be raised, declaring that he had made the Danes Christian. But the process was far from sudden. For a long time, two faiths coexisted in Scandinavia. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where a Christian cross lies beside a pendant shaped like Thor's hammer. This shows that people tried to blend old and new symbols, seeking balance between the ancient gods and the new religion. Resistance, however, was strong. Some communities refused to accept the new faith, seeing it as a threat to tradition. There are accounts of uprisings against missionaries, churches destroyed, and priests driven out. For many warriors, abandoning Odin and Valhalla meant losing the very meaning of their lives, since their courage and honor were bound to promise of joining the hall of the slain after death. Yet, gradually, Christianity gained the upper hand. It was supported by new monarchs who saw the church as an ally in strengthening their rule. Christian rulers could more easily conduct diplomacy with Europe, secure papal backing, and open new trade routes. In this way, politics and economics became allies of the faith. Conversion to Christianity also reshaped culture. Instead of sacrifices and groves, churches began to rise. The old sagas were gradually written down on parchment, which is why they survived to our time. Warrior rituals gave way to new practices: baptism, Christian marriages, and burials. The final decline of paganism came in the 11th century. Iceland, for example, officially accepted Christianity in the year 1000 by a decision of the Althing, the National Assembly. This was a unique moment in history when an entire country changed its faith through compromise rather than war. Even so, the old beliefs never vanished completely. In folk traditions, rituals, and symbols, the shadows of the ancient gods lived on. Thor's hammer remained a popular amulet. Sagas preserved the images of Odin and Thor, and Christian priests often had to adapt to local customs. Thus, Christianity did not simply replace the old faith. It became part of a larger process in which Scandinavia shifted from a warrior, pagan culture into a member of medieval Europe. It was a transformation that touched not only the gods, but the very fabric of society, from politics to family traditions. For the Vikings, a ship was more than a means of transportation. It was a home, a temple, and a weapon all at once. Aboard the longship, legends were born of raids, trade, and the discovery of new lands. But what was everyday life like on these vessels during long journeys? A drakkar or nar was spacious, but never luxurious. There were no cabins or private quarters. Warriors and sailors slept right on the deck or under cloth awnings. Their beds were made of sheepskins or bundles of straw carried aboard. During the day, these bedding rolls were dried in the sun, and at night, they served as the only shield against the cold. In rain or storms, sailors wrapped themselves in cloaks soaked with animal fat to repel water. Food on board was simple but nourishing. They carried dried meat, fish, and hard barley bread. Often, they cooked porridge in large cauldrons right on the deck, kindling a fire in special clay containers. The main drink was water stored in barrels, but beer and mead were also taken, drinks that kept better during long voyages. When stopping ashore, they replenished supplies by fishing, gathering shellfish, or hunting. The daily routine was strict. Discipline ruled on the ship. Every man knew his seat on the rowing bench. The crew's coordination determined both speed and safety. All rowed in rhythm, guided by the beat of a drum or the chant of the helmsman. This rhythm could last for hours until the ship reached open waters and the sail took over. Sailors kept a constant watch on the sea and sky. A lookout might stand on the mast, scanning for shores, islands, or enemy ships. Experienced navigators could read the color of the water, the direction of the wind, and the flight of birds, all helping them find their way without a compass. Life on the ship also had its rituals. Before setting sail, offerings were made to the gods, a coin tossed into the sea, or a drop of sacrificial blood, to appease the waters. The dragon heads carved on the prows were believed to scare away evil spirits and protect the crew. During the voyage, men sang songs and recited sagas to lift the rowers' spirits and ease the long hours of travel. Relations among the warriors were both brotherly and strict. On such limited space, everyone had to follow order, for survival depended on it. Discipline was enforced harshly, from fines to being put ashore. Yet comrades supported one another, sharing food and stories, helping through hardship. In stormy weather, life became a battle. Waves tossed the ship, water flooded the deck, and all rushed to bail it out with buckets. Rowing became impossible, and then they relied on the strength of the hull and the mercy of the gods. Such trials forged the crew into a single family, hardened by danger. When the ship finally reached new land, a spirit of anticipation filled the air. The fate of the voyage was decided there, whether it would mean peaceful trade or raid, or the founding of a settlement, and all of it began with shared work and patience during the long days at sea. Thus, life aboard a Viking ship was harsh, yet full of meaning. It was a school of endurance, brotherhood, and faith. Here, the warrior's character was forged, and the sense was born that the sea was not an enemy but a road to new opportunities. The ship became a world in miniature, and every voyage a trial, and at the same time, a new beginning. The Viking Age lasted for roughly 3 centuries, from the late 8th to the 11th century. During this time, the Scandinavians left a profound mark on Europe and beyond. Yet no era lasts forever, and by the 10th century signs began to appear that the age of the Vikings was drawing to a close. One of the main reasons was the rise of stronger states in Europe. In the early days, monasteries and small settlements were defenseless targets, but over time kingdoms in England, France, and elsewhere strengthened their defenses. Stone castles were built, standing armies organized, and tactics improved. What had once been easy prey was now becoming a formidable obstacle to swift Viking raids. England, in particular, became an example of this transformation. In the 9th century, nearly half the country was under Danish control in the region known as the Danelaw. But by the 10th and 11th centuries, English kings gradually reclaimed their lands. King Alfred the Great and his successors created a system of fortified towns, known as buzz. These allowed armies to be gathered quickly and raids to be repelled. In this way, England transformed from easy plunder into a well-organized kingdom, capable of resisting even large Scandinavian armies. Another major factor was the adoption of Christianity. In the ninth and 10th centuries, missionaries increasingly preached among the Scandinavians. At first, this new faith was seen as foreign, but gradually rulers realized that Christianity opened the door to cooperation with other European powers. The baptisms of the kings of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were not only religious, but also political acts. They integrated Scandinavia into European system of states and weakened the old pagan traditions that had once inspired warriors to seek glory and plunder abroad. More and more often, Vikings who just a few generations earlier had set out on distant raids began to stay home. They became farmers, traders, and craftsmen. The sea remained a part of their lives, but increasingly it was used for commerce rather than for war. The final decline of the Viking Age came in the 11th century. It was brought about not only by political change, but also by decisive military defeats. In 1066, the Vikings made one last great attempt to reclaim influence in England. King Harald III of Norway, known as Harald Hardrada, landed with a massive army on the English coast. At first, he won a victory near York, but soon after he was confronted by King Harold Godwin's son at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The clash was brutal, and the Viking army suffered a crushing defeat. Harold Hardrada was killed, and with him died the hope of the Scandinavians to restore their power over England. That same year became symbolic. Just weeks after Stamford Bridge, the English were defeated by another claimant, William the Conqueror of Normandy. England thus passed into the hands of the descendants of Vikings, but no longer the Scandinavians themselves. This moment marked the true end of the age of raids from the north. Meanwhile, Scandinavia itself was undergoing centralization. The kings of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were building states modeled on those of Europe, with unified laws, organized armies, and Christian churches. The old kings and clan chieftains gradually lost their importance as royal power grew. What had once been a society of free warriors and farmers was becoming classical medieval kingdoms. Through trade and cultural exchange, Scandinavia had already become part of the European world. Pagan rituals disappeared, giving way to Christian churches and monasteries. Ship burials were replaced by burials in churchyards, and the sagas began to be written down as literature shaped by the new faith. Thus, the Viking Age did not end abruptly, but gradually. From the first raids on defenseless monasteries to the creation of states integrated into Europe, just over 3 centuries had passed. The Vikings left behind a legacy still felt today, in languages, in place names, in culture, and even in the genetics of millions. Their era ended, but the memory of it remains a chapter of history that continues to capture the imagination. When we think of the Vikings, images come to mind of ships with carved dragon heads, cold fjords, and brave warriors setting out on distant journeys. But that age has passed. The Scandinavian lands filled with the bells of Christian churches. Instead of battle cries, the sounds of markets and fairs rang out. What was once a society of hunters, farmers, and seafarers became part of the European world. Yet the memory of the Vikings has not disappeared. It lives on in the sagas, in ancient burials, in the words and place names we still use today. It lives in legends that continue to inspire artists, writers, and travelers. The Vikings left behind not only the mark of the sword, but also a cultural legacy that has endured through the centuries. Today, their story reminds us that even the harshest of times become part of humanity's greater journey. The Viking Age is over, but its echoes can still be heard in the waves of the North Sea and in the wind that sweeps across the Scandinavian mountains. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. so you don't miss the next one. And now, set aside your worries, allow yourself some peace, and let this story bring you quiet rest.